Hey everyone, welcome to Encounters USA. If it's aliens, UFOs, Bigfoot, or dogmen you're looking for, you came to the right place. Now listen up as we listen to some of the latest encounters. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your latest encounters on Encounters USA. Today, we are continuing our search for encounters in hotspots in the USA, and our subject is the Hudson Valley. This is the second podcast in the series, so if you missed our first show, you definitely want to check that out. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can check it out by clicking on this link here. On other podcasts, you'll have to go back in the series. So today we are going to be talking to a very special person who is a guest and a sometimes regular on the podcast, and that is Deete. Now, let me introduce Deete a little bit before I actually bring her on. I first became aware of her work a few years ago watching her videos at reincarnatedmormon.com on YouTube. I was fascinated by her remote viewing abilities, and I was fortunate enough to be able to interview Deete on another podcast. A few weeks ago, Deete interviewed me for her podcast, and we found that we would need a lot more time to discuss the issues in which we were interested. So, Deete, welcome to Encounters USA.
Thank you, Matt.
So, do you have any anything that you would like to see happen on Encounters USA? Or are there any particular interest that you have that you would like to bring to the show?
Yeah, so I guess, I started because my journey started really from leaving the Mormon church and kind of delving into research with the Mormon movement and kind of linking it up to some research that I was doing with the occult and mysticism. And for that, I've kind of branched out reincarnated Mormon to actually be reincarnated mystic. So though Mormonism is like a background for me and I branched through it, I do like expanding upon that and making it a bigger ordeal, I guess, with mysticism, extra dimensionals, and then just having Mormonism kind of part of that, because I think we're all part of it. It's not like, oh, Mormonism is what extra dimensionals kind of connected to that led me to want to discover this. It was kind of like feeling like we were all connected to other dimensions in general, and this Mormon movement had a small part of that. So, I'm really excited to discuss these type of topics, and I'm always happy to bring in the Mormon church and the Mormon movement in relation to this, but I'm also really excited to branch out into any different organizations that have had experiences with this as well.
Great. And Deete, let me just ask you, you have some amazing abilities, and one of them is remote viewing. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit after we start getting into the Hudson Valley in particular. But it's very nice to have you on the podcast because of your remote viewing abilities. And do you have any, do you use this in a professional manner, or is there something you do to help people using these abilities?
So after leaving the church and just doing research, I opened up my own psychic abilities and, did private readings for people based on intuitiveness. And then I had a friend who was teaching remote viewing, and he actually learned from some of the very well-known remote viewers. So I went out of my way to make sure I took a class from him. And it was a little bit more challenging to learn how to remote view the way that the military taught it, because I hadn't had any structure to my readings before. So my remote viewing, I would say, is a little bit different because I developed so much psychic ability before the remote viewing procedures. So I use a lot of intuitive feeling with it versus the strict structure that I think is typical for remote viewers. I don't know that a lot of remote viewers in the community will like the way I remote view, because I use like audio. I use a lot of psychic type of stuff that bypasses that structured type of look that they want to see that it's accurate, basically.
Yeah, that was the one thing that really drew me to you was knowing what I know about history and listening to you talk about things. You kind of get a sense of people and whatever, but everything that I heard you talk about was pretty much right on. And I thought, wow, well, she either knows a lot about history or she's looking at something that, that she's got an insight that others don't have. So the other thing that I want to also add is, before we jump into our topic of the Hudson Valley, is that when you're talking about having experience in the LDS Church, or Mormon Church as it's no longer called, but when you have experience in the LDS Church like you and I do, then you're talking about a familiarization with almost a whole different culture, a whole different, what do I want to say? Like I don't want to say, like mythology in the terms of like the Greeks, but it is a whole different, it's a whole different discipline with different characters, different people. And so having that alternative, almost reality, it does give you a sense of being able to appreciate almost another culture's reality compared to the mainstream culture of the U.S. So, Deete, it is so great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I'm really excited about this.
All right. Well, we'll see how excited you are, because we need to get into, we're going to start talking about a picture that was just recently posted. But before we do, I just want to encourage you that if you're watching the podcast on YouTube, please consider subscribing and ringing that bell, and check out Deete on reincarnatedmormon.com. And Deete, did you have Reincarnated Psychic? Is that also something? Is that a website or something that people can go to?
Yeah. So I was Reincarnated Mormon for a long time, and then I've decided to change my website and branding to Reincarnated Mystic, just so people know that I'm branching out. I still like the Mormon culture with it, or, integrating some of those experiences with my brand, but I wanted to branch out a little bit. So Reincarnated Mystic is the new website.
All right. So reincarnatedmystic.com to contact Deete and learn more about her. So if you like this podcast and you would like to see more of Deete, I just have to throw this in here. Please leave a comment in our comments section and hit that subscribe button, but let Deete know you'd like to see more of her on Encounters USA, as I know I would. And unfortunately, our other podcast host, Tony, is right now under his girlfriend's car working on her transmission, I guess. So we will catch him the next time around. So the first thing that we want to look at today, Deete, is there's a picture. If you're looking on YouTube, you can see a picture that shows a Bigfoot on the left, and then there is a footprint on the right. And Deete, do you actually have that picture? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to just we're not going to bother with the guy on the left, but that actually the picture on the left is almost a residue from the last show. We just didn't have time. There was so much stuff that Tony and I were talking about, but the one fact that we left out when we were talking about, we spent a lot of time talking about Dogman and Bigfoot, is that New York is number 5 in Bigfoot sightings. Not New York City, but New York State ranks number 5 in Bigfoot sightings. And so in the first podcast, we talked a lot about Bigfoot, but in this podcast, it's going to be more about, or mostly about, the Hudson Valley Flap in the 80s. But the picture that I'm interested in is this possible Bigfoot sighting in Rhinebeck. So what are your initial impressions of that, Deete, without any remote viewing skills?
So, are you looking specifically at the actual guy or the footprint?
I'm looking at the footprint. That thing is huge.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it could be an actual footprint because it doesn't have, I mean, it doesn't look like it was made up. It looks realistic to me.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like a hoax, I guess I would say. It looks pretty realistic, like a real footprint of something.
Yeah, well, this is what I think. Okay, so the depth of the snow is probably 1 to 2 inches, and the footprint goes all the way down, but it doesn't appear because if you look at the bottom of that print, it doesn't appear that the snow was compacted down. It looks more like it had been moved out of the way. So maybe it's compacted, maybe it melted there, and it just formed into ice at the bottom. But I looking at it, it looks like it could be a composite. I mean, if you're looking at possible explanations, if it's for real, that thing is huge. It's got 3 pads on its foot and a heel, and I've never seen anything like that. The next thing is it could be a composite of the center piece could be a foot, just a shoe, and then on the side, maybe it was somebody's imaginary, I don't know, but it could be anything, I guess is what I'm going to say. But I don't think it's actually authentic, and I would definitely not risk my career on whether or not that was a real Bigfoot. So you say it's possible.
Well, the thing that gets me thinking that it's probably not a hoax is just like you were saying, the 3 parts in the front, like what did you call them? The 3.
I think I called them the paws or the pads.
Like pads. Yeah. I just feel like that seems realistic to me, but I also feel like it could be real just because I've seen a lot of really, really weird things. So I guess I have this idea of like, yeah, it should be proven, but at the same time, I'm like, it could be possible because I've seen some really weird things that it wouldn't surprise me.
All right. That's what we want to hear. But for me, okay, the first thing I'm saying is there anything in the files that are similar to this? And can you recall of anything with 3 toes and this is not 3 toes. These are not toes. They're not claws. They're pads. So can you recall having ever heard of anything like this? I mean, it's obviously not a Bigfoot foot.
Okay, I get what you're saying. I don't know. I don't know if I've heard of anything like that because I feel like whenever I've had others talk about their encounters, they don't talk about their feet. It's always like their body size. Their body size was huge. It was not human, just specific features of the face. Not very many will talk about the feet.
Right. That's true. So I'm just going to have to leave that alone. I would not, like I said, I wouldn't stake my life on it. And the only thing that I've ever heard of is some 3-toed monster in the South, right? And it could be a monster, it could be somebody's cousin. We just don't know. But anyway, I have heard of 3-toed monsters in the South. So I haven't heard of them up in New York State. So I am going to have to leave that as completely skeptical. All right. So Deete, anything else you want to add to that before we move on to the UFO flaps of the 1980s?
Well, I guess the only other thing I would add is how come there's only 1 footprint? Like, wouldn't there be more also? Exactly.
And you would definitely want to make sure that you documented as many as possible. So probably you are right. There probably is only 1 footprint. So anyway, all right. So the UFO flap of the 1980s. Deete, what do you know anything about it? Have you heard about it?
Nope.
You're probably too young. You probably weren't alive then, and so it'd probably be something maybe you would have read in a history book of UFOs or something. But you ever heard of it?
No.
All right. Well, let's just get down to brass tacks because I had the same issue with Tony. You're aware of the term UFO flap, yes?
Actually, no, I don't know.
Well, a UFO flap is sometimes UFOs, they have wings and they flap the wings and that, no, I'm joking. A UFO flap is actually it's when a lot of UFO sightings occur at the same time by a lot of people. And it's not one or two, it's like dozens or maybe even possibly hundreds, as in the case of the Hudson Valley. So that is what a UFO flap is. It's just an outbreak of UFO sightings. So what we're talking about today is the flap that actually occurred officially from like 1981 to 1987. And I think that the best way to do this, to introduce it, is that there is a story written up by a woman named Cheryl Costa, and that was in the Syracuse New Times. And she's talking about how it's a possibility the Hudson Valley could become another UFO hotspot, another UFO flap. So would you like me to go ahead and read that, Deete?
You want me to read it? Or did you
No,
say
I
you're
asked,
going to read it?
well, I said I asked you if you would like me to go ahead and read that.
Sure.
All right. Well, I'll just go ahead and do that then. So the Hudson Valley, according to Cheryl Costa of the Syracuse New Times, has a long, strange history of paranormal occurrences. Most notable was the UFO wave of the 1980s, which began with sighting reports of boomerang-shaped UFOs in 1981. The wave of various UFO sightings peaked in 1983 and 1984 with many thousands of reports, followed by many books and documentaries about the subject. Now, in the last podcast, yet I'm going to interrupt here for a second. Tony and I talked about J. Allen Hynek, the head of Project Blue Book. We talked about his book, Under Siege, and this one, and we also talked about Whitley Strieber's book, which is mentioned here. So continuing on, legendary author Whitley Strieber had his alien abduction experiences during the mid-1980s near Middletown, New York, which he wrote about in his well-known book, Communion. The wave also led to the establishment of the Pine Bush UFO Festival in Crawford Township, which straddles Ulster and Orange counties. Many sightings during the 1980s wave spanned the known inventory of UFO-shaped profiles, with boomerang and triangle shapes dominating the reportages. Yet it seems that the vast majority of eyewitnesses never formally reported what they saw to authorities. So the story continues on, and recently Science and Environment reporter-editor Linda Moulton Howe said she was getting reports that suggested UFO sightings were on the increase in the Hudson Valley and on the scale of the 1980s. So I spent a Saturday morning crunching numbers for key sighting counties in the Hudson Valley. So basically, this article is saying that in the 1980s, there was a seriously huge UFO flap that we're going to go into more detail of, but Linda Moulton Howe and other UFO researchers think that it's going to happen again. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the particular UFO sightings. I think do you have that sighting from CBS?
Yeah, so the Hudson Valley UFO sighting that was on CBS Evening News?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the UFO sightings in the Hudson Valley are receiving extra scrutiny as investigators look into some credible claims. You may think that people who believe in little green men from Mars are a bit eccentric, but more and more people are taking local claims of UFO sightings seriously. We spoke to Chris DePerno from a national organization called MUFON. The Mutual UFO Network consists of scientists, investigators, and UFO enthusiasts who look into claims of unidentified flying objects. According to DePerno, the Hudson Valley is the hotbed of activity. An investigation is currently underway in Orange County where witnesses claim to have seen a triangle of lights hovering over a lake. MUFON says that credible sources reported that barrels were dumped from the craft into the water before the object disappeared. DePerno and his organization has a team of diverse, ready to jump into search for the barrels if his investigation turns up more evidence. Recent Hudson Valley UFO activity has been made mainstream news. This week, CBS interviewed DePerno and UFO witnesses in Pine Bush. If you're interested in learning more about the local UFO activity, the annual Pine Bush UFO Fair is taking place this Saturday, and more info on that. And just so everyone knows, this was just posted May 17th of 2019. So literally just, a few days, yesterday, right?
Yep.
No, a month ago.
Oh, yep. I guess you're right. Yeah, my math was never that good. Yeah, so that is amazing. And aside from being a nice plug for the Hudson Valley MUFON people, there is a lot of how do I say mystery into the story, because if you, when I found the story, I had a link to it and everything. But if you look at it, and I'll tell you the exact headline, it says, "Credible Hudson Valley UFO sighting makes CBS Evening News." That's the headline. And the link is broken. If you click on the link, the story is no longer there. So somebody made them pull the sighting. So that's very interesting, that they basically came out and CBS News said that was a totally credible sighting. And then they came and they just pulled the whole story, and you can't find it. All right. So let's just ask a couple of questions here. Now, what did in this sighting, what did because we're going to go back and talk about the 1983 sightings, but in this sighting, what was the shape of the craft? I think it was a V shape, right?
Well, from what the pictures have, it just looks like a round light. I can't tell.
It says it's a triangle. It says a triangle shape.
Oh, a triangle of lights. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that, because what we're interested in, and as we go back to the other story, is that we want to keep focused on this triangle shape. And in your story that you read, this thing is dumping barrels of something. Do they not have to file environmental impact statements in the Zeta Reticuli community, or wherever these people are from? Or are these people not from someplace else? Are these craft really from here? So in the previous account, which we're going to be talking about more, the shapes were a lot of these boomerang and triangle shapes. So we need to remember that. Now, Deete, if you don't mind, before we go on to the next one, let's look at some of the towns that we're talking about. We're talking about Pine Bush, New York. We're talking about Orange County. And then also, in a lot of the stories I see, these things are moving over into Connecticut. So are they Wall Street traders? We'll have to look into that. So just as an overall from your story, do you trust the story? Do you think it's credible?
I don't know, because I've heard a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but I have heard sightings where they think it's UFO, and then it turns out to be like a government spacecraft or something very similar. And so it's like, it wasn't a UFO, it was just a government, operation kind of thing. And I thought it was kind of interesting with the story that this guy DePerno has this team that he's willing to investigate the barrels for evidence that could get him in a lot of trouble, right? Like if there's something in those barrels. So I don't know where this story went or what happened, but the fact that it like all of a sudden just disappeared isn't surprising because of that. I mean, if you have a team where you're willing to investigate and it's making the news, that could be really dangerous for him. So they must have hushed him some way or whatever happened. I don't know, but that's pretty daring.
Yeah, exactly. And just it says that MUFON calls the sources credible, right? So I guess that they feel that they're credible enough to go in and send some divers after it. But like you say, if that's like toxic waste or something, they might not come back, or who knows? Maybe they were alien eggs, or maybe like in that H.G. Wells movie. So, yeah, it's kind of dangerous to go down and dive on them. But you know what? I'd do it. I'd do it if I had a chance. So
I would probably say that's more of a government thing. I don't know. I feel like there'd be more of a government operation of this spacecraft than UFO. I just don't see UFOs really dropping barrels of stuff in the lake. But
well, I think we can narrow it down to one thing, and that is whoever's doing it is somebody that doesn't care that people are seeing them do it. So yeah, it probably is the government. But okay, so if we're going to go down that dark and dirty road, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about some of these encounters. Now, as we talk about these 1981 to basically 87 sightings, how familiar are you with the secret space program?
So I'm actually not very familiar at all. I don't know why I've kind of stayed away from it. I guess there's just so much information out there, and I get a lot of emails talking about it that I'm just like, I just kind of stay indifferent. So I don't know a lot about it.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you don't, because it actually makes it easier to do this, because if you do know a lot about it, you might argue with me. But I talked to Ed Dames about the secret space program, and Ed Dames is the famous Army remote viewer featured in The Men Who Stare at Goats. And I asked him about, what about these UFOs and the South Pole and the Nazis? He said it's nothing. He says there's nothing to it. And so if you start to, and I didn't ask him any more about it, but if you start to discount the Nazis having UFOs in the, in the Antarctic, whatever, then basically you start to discount William Tompkins, and you start to discount the secret space program. You discount basically all of the latest UFO, as we were talking about earlier with the Mormon Church, kind of the mythology, of, there's Nazi UFOs in Antarctica. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at a question of, are UFOs, or are these from someplace else? And so we need to look at possibilities. And we're just going to leave that right there where it is, that there are some things that we do know about, but we're going to look at these possibilities first. And I think we're going to rule out that these are some kind of Nazi UFOs. So I'm going to read the first or one of the encounters from 1983, and it goes something like this. The public hearing was plodding along routinely at the town hall one night last month. All of a sudden, a cop burst in yelling, "The UFOs are here! The UFOs here!" said Peter A. Brandenburg, a 43-year-old real estate developer. Everyone jumped up and jolted out. We went flying down the stairs to see this thing, just staring at it. On a night before that, William A. Pollard was driving along Interstate 84 near Brewster. Wait a minute here. My neighbor said they had seen something, said Mr. Pollard, 29, the manager of an automobile service center. I said, yeah. I never believed in that stuff, but off in a field, I saw this gigantic triangle with lights about 30 feet off the ground, hovering. Then it turned off its lights and shot straight up. That's when I said, whoa, wait a minute here. All right, so Deete, here we have a real estate developer whose job is based on his credibility. And I don't know what Mr. Paul is, a manager of an automobile service center. So he's a manager and also deals with the public, job based on credibility. And they say that they see a gigantic triangle craft. Have you ever heard of the TR-3B?
No.
All right. Well, I'll give you just a little tiny bit of background. When they were having the disclosure meetings, one of the people who was a close friend of, I think it was Ben Rich, went into a building in Edwards Air Force Base and saw a TR-3B full size, actually one or two of them sitting there. And they said, this one actually works. The other one doesn't work. I think that was the story. And then he went and was talking to the general and said, I saw the TR-3B, and the general just freaked out. And where did you see it? How do you know what it is? And basically read him the riot act and said, you never, ever talk about seeing that thing. So this TR-3B, and if you're watching on YouTube, I'll show you a picture of it if you haven't seen it already, is a triangular craft. It is a flat triangle, and I don't know how to what to compare it to, except it's just a flat triangle. And how it works, and I wrote about this in my book, Deceptions of the Ages, which is another thing that I wrote about in it, is that according to scientists, they have like a mercury drive engine. And the mercury spins around so fast, it's got charged particles, it creates a field, and the thing is able to maneuver inside that field, which explains why it has no sound. So that is the possibility of an American, a world-based craft, is that it's one of these TR-3Bs. And there's enough evidence to show that these things actually exist. So the question is what was seen the other night, also a triangle-shaped lights, and what they saw were these TR-3Bs they saw. Now the TR-3B is it's not that big. It's probably about the size of in dimension, maybe about the size of a jet fighter, maybe a little bit bigger. So when we get into some of these other descriptions, then we kind of have to take notice. So there was a little bit more to that article. Did you see that part about Westchester County?
Yeah, do you want me to go ahead and read it?
Yeah, if you would. I want to see that part about the V shape.
Okay. Throughout northern Westchester County, Dutchess and Putnam counties, and western Connecticut this summer, thousands of residents have reported strange objects in the sky, each usually in a V shape or a circle about the size of a football field, absolutely noiseless and outlined in brilliant lights of white, red, or green. At night, the curious sometimes crowded the Taconic Parkway, a prime site for viewing. A hotline has been set up in the Westchester to field inquiries, and in shopping centers and at parties, the talk is of secret weapon or of close encounters. The police call it a hoax.
All right. So again, let me remind you that this is not happening now. This is happening back in the 1980s, and it went on for a long time. It went on from 1982, they say, up until 1987, and throughout it, the police never, even though the police were actually some of the major witnesses and were included in J. Allen Hynek's book, they officially called it a hoax. They called it a series of small aircraft. They called it just about everything but what it was. So that is something that we really need to take a look at when we start to look at these UFOs, because we need to look at these things as being man-made or not man-made. And we know that in the equation now is the fact that we have these triangle TR-3Bs. So the last thing that I want to discuss here is the fact that the sightings just they went up, they crescendoed, and then they seemed to have dropped off for like 20, almost 30 years. And I have to ask myself, and I'm just going to ask you, what do you think that they're doing here?
Well, if it is more government-based, I would say that it's like more of a test, because I've heard one time that the government is like 50 years ahead of where the mass of society is. So perhaps these were built in, like World War II time, 1940s, and then in the 80s they were tested. I don't know if that was, a possibility. And now there's other testing that they do that's not so in the public.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think that the bell, that thing that ended up in Kecksburg in 1965, I think that was launched out. I mean, it's just an idea, of course. It's a hypothesis, but I think that based on that Mercury engine, I think that launched out of Germany in 1965 or 1945, and it plopped down in 1965. And that was what the big deal was. I think those Werner von Braun's and the rest of those Nazis at the NASA project said, "Hey, you better go grab that thing. That belongs to us. So you don't want that stuff getting out." And people even said that they saw, I think they said that they saw mercury or some liquid coming out of it. So, yeah, something from another time period. That's a very interesting take on it. And if it would be funny if they were to dive into that lake and actually find barrels full of mercury, because that would prove that it was basically using the technology that we obviously know about. So it's very interesting stuff. So in the 1980s, just as we covered this UFO flap, what we're going to do is there are so many stories and there are so many encounters that we are going to talk about, or we're going to actually devote a whole podcast, a whole hour to just the stories and the encounters that came out. But we do want to create a very good, solid foundation so that people understand kind of the science and they kind of understand the history of this valley. So, Deete, let's just look at the level of activity, and it went from 1981 to 1987, and then it just kind of dropped off. So if you're thinking, "Oh, this is the end of the world," well, why do you think that there would be such a long series of encounters, and then suddenly they just go away?
I don't know if it was military, like we were kind of possibly suggesting prior. I don't know, besides the fact that they were running an experimentation or testing phase, and then that phase is over. But I've also heard, I have a lot of clients when I do my readings that are from specific generations that have well more contact and UFO experiences than other generations. And part of that channeling is that there were extra dimensional experimentations on humanity as far as like a linear time period. And those operations no longer exist in the way that they do right now. One of those operations that existed, was it in the 70s, 80s, was like more DNA sampling and alterations and stuff like that, and I haven't got that they're doing that in the same way, at least not as invasive. So I don't know. I guess it could be the common theme seems to be like this period of operations and experimentation, and then once they get what they want, or once they figured out what they need to know, they change things, and it's in different phase now.
So do you think that they were actually doing, and I know you don't know this, but you think it's possible they were conducting some kind of genetic manipulation or doing something to us?
The government or like extra dimensionals?
Well, whoever's doing this, why they were so interested in the 80s in that area?
I don't know why the 80s and why that area. I don't know that. I know that, I don't know for sure, but I do feel like humanity has such a vast amount of DNA in the species that it is so intriguing to study and to learn about. Consciousness is so interesting. And it's so different in a 3D setting. So I wouldn't be surprised if DNA is studied through other extra dimensionals that are trying to understand their own species, kind of the same way that we, study chimpanzees or study, whatever else, just to understand ourselves.
Okay, so let's jump into that then, because we were going to have Deete remote view a number of pictures from the Hudson Valley, and we had a problem with it, and so we're not going to have her do that today. But what I'd rather have Deete do today is I would like to have her talk about a little bit the process of remote viewing, about what your perception is when you're remote viewing something, and how that can give us insights into things. But, well, anyway, let's just go ahead and have you ask that, because I have 10,000 more questions.
Yeah, so there will be like a coordinates or numbers and letter sequence. And me as the viewer, it's best to be blind, so I don't know what I'm viewing. And I just look and tell myself, what initial perceptions do I feel when I recite this number? Does it feel cold? Does it feel like I'm outside? All these type of things that, you can intuitively feel for your body. You don't go into like any logic or analytical. You just kind of write down, I feel cold, I feel outside. And then I kind of try to integrate more of the systematic way that the military was taught, where I kind of bypass my own like emotions and I get more into like the structure based of it. So you do, you write out the number really fast, and then you do a quick like ideogram where you just draw a quick little sketch. And then you probe into that sketch and just write down very basic, outside, it feels like I'm on rocks, just very basic things. And then you probe into it deeper and deeper as the session goes on. And I feel like I open myself up to audible messages, or just different, I guess, channeled messages that I don't know if other remote viewers do. I think they shut down a little bit more to that. So there have been times where I've had different beings come and give a message based on what I've been viewing or whatever the case is. You might find this interesting. Every time I view the Book of Mormon, or like, how was this written? What was seen? What was going on? I get blocked every time. And I have a being come right to my face and basically is like, you're not looking here. Go away, go away. And a friend and I had gotten a couple things, but I wouldn't be surprised if something extra dimensional was tied to that, because I get pushed away by this specific extra dimensional. I can draw what he looks like, and he comes to me every time when I try to view this specific thing. So yeah, I feel like it can be accurate, but I also feel like it can be very abstract depending on what you're viewing, because the mind maybe can't make sense of what's happening in such a short amount of time if it's a big concept. So it kind of creates like an allegory or a story for you to understand it. So, yeah, I think that's all that I have for that.
Okay. And that is fantastic. And as I said, I've seen remote viewers before, and I've never seen anybody that does it quite like Deete does. And the fact that you brought in the Book of Mormon is very funny, because we really can't, I can't let you leave the podcast without touching on that aspect of this, of the subject. Is the Hudson Valley is not, it's not where Joseph Smith had his encounter. And Joseph Smith reportedly found these plates about Native American culture. And then you come and say that you're kind of blocked from it. So that's another aspect of remote viewing where some people might just say, this is just way too freaky, put on the tinfoil hat. But I've seen this with other remote viewers, and very credible ones, like Ingo Swan said that they tried to remote view, I think 9/11. They tried to remote view the towers, and they were blocked. They were somehow psychically blocked from remote viewing what was going on in the towers prior to 9/11. So that, so what you're saying about being blocked in the Book of Mormon, I've heard that before, and how interesting is that? And especially because you keep talking about multidimensional aspects of the religion. So yeah, so it just adds all that strangeness to this area. And if I lived there, I think I'd probably move. Just kidding. Don't need to bring down the real estate prices there. All right, so Deete, let's put some. Well, let's share this. What happened with us, because I sent you some pictures that were taken by a guy named. He's a doctor, and his name is. I want to say Connor, but I cannot. Oh, it completely skips me, or can't remember his name right now. It will come to me. But anyway, he took a series of photographs on time lapse. And if you're watching the podcast again, you can see these. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see these. But I had to remote view these. But the thing is that I could not take them. I mean, I couldn't take a screenshot. I had to take it on my computer. So I think that there was interference, and we just didn't get anything from these photographs. So, Deete, can you explain? I mean, that is kind of one of the things about how the process works, right? Because I took a picture of my screen with my phone, so there's other things in the picture. Is that going to mess up the picture, or is that going to mess up your perception?
I don't think so. Not if you phrase the task. Viewer will view this image. It just depends how you, I guess, phrase the task. But I don't see as a viewer that it would be confusing, just because when I was trained, there was a lot of things pulled from the internet all the time like that. And we were pretty accurate. I mean, we got pretty good stuff. So.
Okay. And anyway, there were a number of very strange pictures, and the actual size of these craft, and I'm just trying to look through, and I'm trying to find a story that talks about the size of the craft. But some of these guys are saying these crafts are as big as football fields, right? So when we're going to have to jump back into our conversation of the secret space program, because if you have, you know William Tompkins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you remote view his something of his? I think somebody took a picture you remote viewed.
So I don't know if I remote viewed him. We did like a channeling, because he had a friend that knew me.
Wow. Okay.
So we did.
So William Tompkins says that we have these craft that are like the size of football fields. They're like, not football fields. He says we build craft that are kilometers long. And John Lear said the same thing. So have you ever seen any of that?
No, but I was doing some research, just different encounters and experiences down in southern Utah, because I had a weird experience. And one of the gentlemen that had been living in this specific location for pretty much his whole life, he's almost 70 now, he said that him and a friend saw it's more desert down in southern Utah, and he said that they saw the ground kind of open up and this big craft came in. And he said that the friend works more with like UFO sightings. He says he doesn't really do much of that, but this is all he said, she said. But that friend, I guess, there has always stating that there's a ton of sightings at night, but they did see the ground sort of open up from a distance with the craft that came down in it. So, and there's been other stories of underground type of facilities where maybe they could be housed. I don't know for sure, but it's my only experience with the possibility, I guess.
I'm sorry, Deete. My AirPods keep going out. At the beginning of that, did you say how big the craft was?
No, he never told me. He just said the ground opened.
Okay.
He made it sound like pretty big. I mean, I don't know.
Because that goes right in line with the William Tompkins story. That, of course, we don't have the size of the craft, but he says they're all built down in southern Utah. And I don't even think he even
Oh,
said southern Utah. I think he said Utah. So it
hmm.
would have to be either southern or eastern Utah, I guess.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I thought for some reason they were built in Colorado. But-
Yep. Well, according to William Tompkins, they were built in Utah. So, um, but again, you have to go back to, that pyramid or that building that he makes based on, things that some other people say are not true. Now, maybe Ed Dames could be wrong, but I put a lot of stock in him. I mean, the Army did, the CIA did. So um, I don't know. But when we're looking at the Hudson Valley sightings, people make some very interesting comments and observations. And one is, if this is a secret program, why are they doing it where everybody can see it? You know? So do you have any explanations for that, why they might do that?
Like in the Hudson Valley, like why would they do it if people in the Hudson Valley could see, kind of
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
I don't know, because it's the same thing with Southern Utah. I mean, this gentleman has seen a lot. I think that they just know that if people talk about it, it's kind of like they sound crazy. Like this person will probably just be discredited because they're just small town, Southern Utah boy doesn't know. I don't know. Maybe they just know that there could be no credibility there. I think that maybe the danger could come if like somebody did have a strong following, or there could be more influence. I don't know if they care. Like they have the authority in a sense. So
Yeah, you're right. There is no end of examples of how the CIA has, done things like expose populations to different diseases, to radiation. Um, who knows if this is not a huge psychological experiment, like the War of the Worlds we were talking about earlier? Maybe they just want to see if people are going to create or have a mass panic. Um, but then there's the other aspect of it, and that is the Whitley Strieber. I never know if I pronounce his name right. I apologize for it, but Whitley Strieber's communion experience, where they were taking him from his house. Are you familiar with that story at all?
I'm not.
Well, he was taken from his house on a number of occasions. Him and his wife and some friends were staying up in upstate New York, and they abducted him. And he, according to the book, had like a relationship with them. They would do their experiments, and he would ask them certain, like philosophical questions, and they would tell him things that he wrote in communion. So I won't tell you what's in communion, so you'll have to go out and buy the book. But yeah, that was something that happened to Whitley Strieber. And if you, as an author, you're not going to come out and say, I've been abducted by UFOs, and talk specifically about the horrible things they did to him, without fearing of losing your credibility. But he did come forward. And as far as I know, I think John Mack of Harvard had hypnotized him. And so he'd gone through that whole experience. So, but that was part of it. And Whitley Strieber was not the only one. There were dozens, if not hundreds of people who saw not only UFOs of the same, like the Greys. People saw reptilians, and there were massive accounts of Bigfoot sightings. And we talked about on the last show about even Dogman. Even Dogman was out there. So something really went awry in the 1980s. So do you I just wanted to see, could you just possibly, have you ever remote viewed like a craft or something that you could kind of tell us what that's like?
Yeah, we can put the link in the description box because it's on YouTube, so people can kind of even get a feel of the process. I just did it on the whiteboard. I had a friend, he just sent it to me. I didn't know what I was viewing at the time, but he's really into like UFOs, and he's had a contact experience. So he was curious and sent that to me, so we can put that for people to check out. But the feeling of that view was a misunderstanding. I don't think that, so it did feel like it was extra dimensional. This one didn't feel like government, but I do think there are a lot more government than we may think versus extra dimensional. But the extra dimensional that I was viewing just felt misunderstood. There was this idea of like, I'm trying to kind of do research and study to help humanity. And we felt like we were getting attacked. We're getting probed. We're getting, I guess, the emotions were just so strong on the human's perspective versus the extra dimensional felt very logical. Like, I'm trying to help you, but I have to do this so that you guys, so that we understand. I feel like if I were to interpret that, it's sort of the same way that humans treat animals. Like we're not trying to hurt them, but I would perceive that maybe from their perspective that we can be very intolerant or very uncompassionate, but maybe we have to go through that to be able to understand each other. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. But my question is, you're in conversation with this being?
So in the remote viewing that I did, it feels more like you can get into their consciousness and get into maybe their thoughts a little bit.
But my question is how are they going to help us? How is,
well, that didn't come up because I didn't ask.
Okay. Well, that would be my question is, are you creating a better person or are you creating something that's better for you?
Right. It just felt like they were helping. You don't understand what I'm doing. I'm trying to help your species. And there was just this constant misunderstood. I'm misunderstood.
Yeah. Well, that's helping is that's a philosophical question, and one guy's help could be another guy's horror. So and like you say, they are very I want to say emotionless, and I think that from what I've seen, they don't really understand emotions and all that. And I just wonder if this is what they're doing, if they're just trying to breed emotions out. And the other thing that I think might be happening is that the Earth is like this, and I'm not trying to gross you out or anything, but the Earth is basically an experiment in a lab on the far end of the universe in the galaxy. And maybe they're just scraping like mold off to create a better mold, to create a better disease. And that's all we are to them. What we are to ourselves, that could be absolutely nothing to them. And that maybe there's certain parts of our genes, our makeup, whatever, that they can manipulate to make better. So who knows? But I'm always of the one to say, I want to know what's best for me. I want to make that decision. And I'm not so sure that some alien making my decisions for me is going to be the best for me. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I see that perspective because it does sometimes feel like we're in a scientific lab and there's tests and trials and different things that almost takes away our free will. Like it doesn't feel like we're free if you really get down to the underlying basis of how society's structured. It's like, and when you study philosophy and stuff, you see like to allow people to become more free feeling, you have to let them know that they're not slaves, but also maintain kind of like this slave structure for the masters. So there's this kind of play on like, well, you're not really slaves, but if you look underneath, you can kind of see that we really aren't free. So I agree with that. But I also see so much divine experience in this life that also makes me feel like I do resonate with this idea of being misunderstood. I do see this kind of idea of, we don't understand our human species self without really understanding, the insect or the tree, the smaller species. We don't, because we're the same. We're conscious beings made of very similar biological consciousness. So we study these smaller aspects to understand how we can grow, and we can in turn help that other species evolve as well. So I wonder if that's some of that there. I wonder if they're learning of their own divinity through our divinity. And some of that does come through going through darkness. And so when you think of it that way, Earth is, it's very divine. It's very like majestic in a way. And we're not evolving just by ourselves. We're also evolving with these other dimensional species, with, the trees and the plants. Like, it's all evolving together. It can't be separated. So, I think that they, I think other extra dimensionals understand that. I think that they know that they can't evolve if we are enslaved for a long period of time.
So do you think that I have to tell you, that's also very interesting. And as you talk, I keep asking myself so many questions. And then by the time you finish, I forget all of them. So you seem to think that we are undergoing some kind of an evolution still. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
But a spiritual evolution.
A spiritual evolution. But I do wonder if there was times when it was slowed down. Like when, I don't know if it was an external influence that slowed down our evolution and we became more like workhorses, breeders. That's what it felt like for my grandparents. I mean, they didn't really have a lot of free will. They were forced to do things just to maintain life in general. So it feels like we are expanding as a consciousness. That's what I perceive.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it works for some, but I don't think that it works for a lot of people. And the thing that I have to question about, again, I've lost they're back again. My AirPods going out, so maybe the aliens are doing that to me. They're having some fun with me, but this whole idea of evolution and whatever, I just I'm very skeptical about it, and I think that I think that some people are evolving, and and that's why I say that maybe it's just like an experiment where you just see what rises to the top, you grab those, and then to heck with everybody else. So I wonder if that's not really it. And it just seems like today seems like you talk about the divine, and that these beings are divine, and that we're close to divinity. But there's also a negative of that, and that the people who are not close to divinity are basically very negative, very horrible people, and our world just seems to be getting more full of all those. So do you have, when you talk about evolution and us reaching a higher plane, is it going to be everybody, or is there going to be a culling process?
I don't know. I mean, I'll have to share them maybe another time on a podcast, but I see evolution kind of similar to like how a bacteria or virus spreads. The strong viruses and bacteria that can latch onto something will be able to grow, and then those others die off, but I'll have to describe how bacteria can like form again back into a body, because that's kind of how I see consciousness and evolution. Like, it can regrow, re-strengthen itself. If it can die off, but it can also become more stronger and powerful. So, I don't know. I almost feel like the whole idea of planet Earth almost feels like if you can hit the human conscious experience with both negative and positive polarities, and they're going to choose one or the other, if they have experienced so much negative and evolved through that to incorporate that with a positive experience, then I feel like that can be close to enlightenment. And I think that is very appealing to these other dimensions. How can they experience so much pain and heartache, but then be able to evolve in such an enlightenment and wisdom through that?
You are way smarter than I am, Deete. I'm way out of my league here. That's amazing. That really makes a lot more sense than just about anything that I can think of. And anyway, I really think that there's a lot of questions here that are that remain unanswered. But when we're talking about like the Hudson Valley, and I wonder I'm sure nobody's done it, but there are, effects that happen to people. Maybe there were more children, maybe there were less children born, maybe there were different kinds of children born. And I'll just tell you something from my own experience. My aunt gave me a book like a long time ago, and it was a book about a guy who was born in the Midwest, and he was in the Air Force, and he got a job where he like communicated with these extraterrestrials on a psychic level. And he did that in England for a long time. Never finished the book. It was very small, but I didn't finish it. I got the gist of it. But the aliens told him that he was talking to, told him that in the Midwest in the 1960s, like when I was born in Ogden, and there were a lot of abductions of pregnant mothers, and that they genetically manipulated them, because just by the law of probability, some of them would end up in the Air Force, some of them would be detected, and one of them would, or a couple of them would end up on this project just by probability. So I was born in Ogden, and so I've always wondered, if maybe, I don't know, but that's just something that this guy talked about when you're looking at evidence. He said that they were actually manipulating people and grabbing people or mothers and ingesting them with alien genetics, whatever. So I don't know. I'm not saying I'm an alien because I can't do algebra, so I don't know what. But anyway, that's just more evidence to kind of support that maybe they are doing something with the genetics. So, Deete, it's been really nice having you on the podcast. I think we should probably wrap it up here. On the next podcast, we are going to be doing, just now that we've built our Hudson Valley UFO structure, we know what's going on there, we kind of know why. We're going to have a whole hour, maybe even a little more, of nothing but encounters from this UFO flap, from dogmen, and from Bigfoot. So that is going to be on our next agenda. So, Deete, I really want to thank you for being on the podcast. Your insights are just incredible. Do you have anything to say to everybody before we go?
I don't think so. I do have a lot of experiences that I would eventually love to share, so I would encourage everyone to stay tuned, and feel free to email at reincarnatedmystic.com or at gmail.com if you guys have any of your own experiences, because I get people all the time wanting to talk about their own experiences and just wanting to feel like they can converse about it. So we're open to it.
Okay. And do you do counseling and stuff like that?
So I do private readings, yes, and I focus mainly on like ancestral karma that your energy may be taking on to move through that, so you can evolve, because it's like you take on your energy of your parents and their programming, and a lot of people are just trying to get rid of that, trying to move past that.
It's all bad.
It's all bad. Well, some of it's not. I mean, I honor that work ethic that those farmers had. They just like go all day.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little story about my grandfather. He was worked in Ogden, and he worked in I guess it was a mine or something. And he used to go to work with in Ogden in the summer, 2 pairs of overalls, like I think long underwear. And he'd say, because the hotter you are, the less something, and working all day in that hot sun. So, I could not possibly do that. So, yep, they were a lot tougher than we are. But, like you say, that those kinds of challenges, and I often tell people, it's just like Nietzsche said, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And people who are probably the worse off are the ones who never have challenges. So, I mean, that's nice to say when you don't have any challenges, but in the end, it does make you stronger probably. So, or it kills you.
Do you think that with that, do you think that there could have been maybe some, alien abductions or genetic manipulation to help us overcome those subconscious programmings, in a way that would help us?
I think all I think about, this will always be my thought process on it, is that evolution has no room for man, because there is no reason for us to have evolved. There's no reason for us to be able to do or to need to do geometry or astronomy or build a car or make the wheel or do anything that we do. There's nothing that would help us that's going to help us to survive when it just comes to grabbing meat and food for the day. So from the time I was a little kid, I mean, that's always been my take on it, is that there's no reason for us to have ever evolved. So something must have come in and changed us a little bit. And, just if you're going to get into my own experience, mine just comes from seventh grade reading about Sumer and looking at these people going, those look like space people with those big eyes, the little statues they had in Sumer. So I said that's got to be aliens. And that's always been my belief, is that there's nothing that explains us as far as evolution goes. So it must be something else. And I was going to ask you if you're going to ask that, and then I promise to let you go. You're obviously studying biology or something, intelligent design. Are you an advocate of it, or
intelligent design? You mean just by everything evolving with divine process, nothing coming into aid it?
I think there can be different levels of it, but that things were designed. It's not a mistake. It's not random chance. There's a reason.
Yes, I completely agree with that. In fact, the more that I study brain and behavior and biology, and even like the electric communication that the body has within itself and how it can connect into like energetic consciousness in general, it's so fascinating what the human body can do. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And again, what is the point of all that, except I've always thought, and one night I was out camping, and I'll just say this, and I keep telling them I'm going to let you go, but I never do. I was out camping one night, and I just asked the question. I'm by myself looking at the stars, and I said, "What's the meaning of life?" And the answer was, the meaning of life is life. And then I was like, really? That's it? Yes, the meaning of life is life. There's no life anywhere else. It's just here, right? So you have to go a long way to find other life. So the only meaning to life is to perpetuate life. So that was my input. And so with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and finish up the podcast. Yeah, it's been so nice having you on here. I cannot possibly say how nice it was.
Thanks, Matt. I had a great time.
All right. Well, we hope we'll see you back maybe sometime this month, or maybe sometime in July. So now that we are at the end of our second podcast about the Hudson Valley Hotspot, we'd like to invite you back for the last part of the Hudson Valley Hotspots, where the entire podcast will be devoted to written and oral accounts of Hudson Valley alien, dogmen, Bigfoot, and UFOs. For Deete and myself, Matthew Hines, we hope you've enjoyed the podcast. If you'd like to comment, please do so on YouTube and iTunes. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and on iTunes. And remember, if you're out in the woods or in the Hudson Valley, always watch your back. Thanks for listening to tonight's show. Please remember, if you've had an encounter, we want to hear about it. Go ahead and email us at encountersusa1@gmail.com or contact us at encountersusa.com, our website, and go to the contact form. All right, everybody. Until next time, be careful out there. And if you're out in the woods, watch your back.